Hello, I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with a book review of Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont by Elizabeth Taylor. I did this as a buddy read with Mel of Mel's Bookland Adventures, and we are collaborating on this review as well. Elizabeth Taylor is 20th century British literature's best kept secret. This is the first book I've read by her, and oh my god, she's amazing. I guess this is also considered to be her masterpiece, published near the end of her life in 1971. I loved it, and I have, in my own imagination of fabulous British women writers, I would put her on the spectrum right smack dab in the middle of Barbara Pym and Muriel Spark. I felt that a lot of the energies of this story echoed both of those fantastic writers. Elizabeth Taylor had the misfortune to share her name with the 20th century's most famous film star, so she would regularly get fan mail that was meant for the other Elizabeth Taylor, asking for photos of her in a bikini, and her husband used to joke, "Well, you should send them one, dear. Give them the shock of their lives." And she would reply, "I don't have a bikini." So she was a housewife, and many of her books apparently were written about housewives who wanted to be artists or who were also artists, and I can't wait to gobble up so much more of her fiction after loving this one. This one is about a old lady, not a little old lady. Mrs. Palfrey is a large, imposing woman, and the stereotypes that perhaps most of us carry around about old ladies can't help but be removed by the opening description of Mrs. Palfrey, which I'm going to share with you. She is checking herself into a long-term stay at a second or third class hotel in London because she's gotten to the point where she can't really take care of herself. She not interested in cooking or living alone in an apartment anymore. And her daughter lives in Scotland and her grandson lives in London, and she hopes that he will visit. So this is when she arrives at the hotel, and it's not an auspicious first impression. But this is also our first impression of Mrs. Palfrey. Followed by the driver and her luggage, for the hotel gave no sign of life, she battled with revolving doors and almost lurched into the hushed vestibule. The receptionist was coldly kind, as if she were working in a nursing home, and one for deranged patients at that. "What a day," she said. The taxi driver, lumbering in with the suitcases, seemed alien in this muffled place, and was at once taken over by the porter. Mrs. Palfrey opened her handbag and carefully picked out coins. Everything she did was unhurried, almost authoritative. She had always known how to behave. Even as a bride, in strange, alarming conditions in Burma, she had been magnificent, calm, when, for instance, she was rowed across floods to her new home, unruffled, finding it more than damp, with a snake wound round the banisters to greet her. She had straightened her back and given herself a good talking to, as she had this afternoon in the train. So we don't know exactly how old she is, but she's an older lady, and she moves into the Claremont Hotel and meets the other aged residents who are also at that last stage of life before the alternatives would be dying or moving into an actual nursing home. This hotel does not provide any kind of home care, so you have to be able to move around and come down for your meals, and there's nobody to help you dress or anything. This is one of the best novels I have ever read about being an old person. I was so disappointed by and bailed early on Joanna Cannon's novel 3 Things About Elsie. And this is the antidote to that. Completely free of sentimentality. This is a tragicomedy, and I don't think I've ever read another novel that has made me feel so deeply the loneliness of being elderly. Another of my favorite quotes, and this is told through the consciousness of Mrs. Palfrey. "The disaster of being old was in not feeling safe to venture anywhere, of seeing freedom put out of reach." And that is the core of this story. Mrs. Palfrey goes out for walks, but she's got problems with her legs, and she has a fall, and I'm not going to say any more, but she ends up, because of all of that, through all of that, venturing out. She does meet a young person, and the reader immediately becomes suspicious of this young man. What are his intentions with Mrs. Palfrey? Because they form a very unconventional friendship, and I thought the way Elizabeth Taylor created this suspiciousness in the reader's mind, it was pitch perfect, and because of the complete absence of sentimentality, I found the ending really moving. Now, there's also comic elements because there's stuff to do with the grandson who never visits, and there's kind of an identity swap, and that plays out masterfully in the novel as well. But if you want an unflinching, funny story about being old and are willing to have your heart broken just a little, or a lot, I can't recommend Mrs. Palfrey at the Claremont highly enough. And now, here's Mel.
Just wanting to talk a little bit about this wonderful book. My name is Mel, and I'm from Mel's Bookland Adventures, if you don't know me, and I read this together with Shawn the Book Maniac, as he said in his part of this video. And I just wanted to, gush a little bit to add to Shawn's gushing. And mainly because I have been wanting to read Elizabeth Taylor for a while, and I never really got round to it. And then something happened where, like the universe prods you to pick it up. First, a friend gave me one of her books and said, I loved it, you have to read her. Then the lovely Jane Catherine from Jane Catherine on Books sent me one of her books. In fact, she sent me this one in the post for my birthday, so thank you. And then, I had another one on my shelf, and so it was time. And what I didn't expect was to be quite so captivated. I think Elizabeth Taylor is one of those forgotten authors of the last century. She writes wonderfully about loneliness. Loneliness has been a theme in literature recently quite a lot. And quite often I'm a little bit put off because loneliness is seen as something that needs to be fixed, needs to be stamped out, it's a bad thing. Whereas Elizabeth Taylor really just looks at the loneliness and presents us with the loneliness in a variety of forms. And in Mrs. Palfrey, who sort of retires to this hotel, which is sort of a last step before the nursing home, she really has nowhere else to go, and so do all the other residents of the hotel, because if they did, they would go somewhere else. No one really enjoys being there. And the loneliness manifests itself in various forms. Sometimes the people have lost someone, other times they've been lonely all their lives. And I thought in particular that it really reflected the time in the late 1960s, early 70s, when this book was written and then published, of the lost empire, which obviously is a good thing. But, these people all had links to empire, links to that greatness. They looked back at a life where some greatness was there, and now they were reduced to being in this hotel on a side road somewhere in London, a hotel that no taxi driver has ever heard of. And they're there at the last moments before they become infirm and have to go to a nursing home. No one really likes to talk about the nursing home. I also really like the friendship that Mrs. Palfrey strikes up with the younger man, because with Ludo, because quite often we don't recognize that old and young can indeed be friends, and that the friendship can be mutually beneficial in many ways. Yet the friendship at the same time doesn't really kill the loneliness. It doesn't totally overcome the loneliness. It's more like a bright spark on a chain of fairy lights in the life of Mrs. Palfrey, and also to an extent in Ludo's life. I highly recommend picking up Elizabeth Taylor. For me, she's certainly been a discovery. I have struggled since finishing this to kind of find something of equal quality, and had to settle on something completely different in the end to kind of get over the beauty of this book, because she's a tough act to follow. That's it for me. Bye-bye.